if you see someone die, like I saw my dad die, but he was in the hospital and he had a stroke. And, you know, he was like morphine and like it was like, you know, it wasn't I'm starving and freezing and diseased and I'm sitting here in this boat dying in the wind, right? Like it wasn't. We don't have that level of connection to death.
Well, again, just as a quick aside, if you don't mind, I've read some really interesting stuff on that topic. That it used to be when we were more a rural society, especially, but even in urban settings, when Grandpa died, it was at home. And you said your goodbyes, and eventually the undertaker came or whatever, but you would be aware of it, and it would be at home. Generally speaking, the animals that you ate, you would slaughter, and you would butcher. You were familiar that they were alive, and now they're dead. You're grateful for their meat, etc. And in the same way that in the Victorian era, nobody ever talked about sex, but it was kind of fetishized and secret, so it could be like weird and terrible things could happen, but nobody could talk about it, including rape, child molestation, whatever. And I'm not calling for complete wild pornographic openness about sex, but it's nice to be able to say, I got raped, if you get raped. Well, in the same way, we've so separated ourselves from death, we've fetishized it now, and it fascinates us in this weird forbidden fruit way. We don't really talk about it seriously and value it and understand it. It's just this abstract concept like sex was to Victorians. And I know it's kind of a complicated set of thoughts, but...
No, well then I would say because we have not contemplated death, I think we have therefore not valued life to the fullest. And I think that explains the overreaction to COVID, is because people have never contemplated their own mortality. So the idea of dying is like, what? I'm going to do so much to prevent dying because I've never seen it. We're never a part of it. I'm going to do so much to prevent dying that I'm going to not even live. Right. And I think that, and so not to bring up my NICU kid again for the third time, but I asked the doctor.
It's obviously enormously important. Don't apologize for that.
Just happened. I asked the doctor, I said, what would have happened 50 years ago? And she said, he would have died immediately, like right away, right out of the womb. And imagine, so that would have been 2 of our 4 kids would have died right away. You live your life differently if that's the case, and that would have been normal, and it would make you way more dependent on God and reliant on God in your life, and we don't have that. So,
right, that's interesting. My wife would have certainly died by giving birth to our first child. So yeah, exactly.
Wow. Anyway, so everyone's dying on the boat. I can't fathom watching people around you die, and let's say they get November, so like December, so people die in December, and then January. And what do you do all day? What are you doing? You can't watch Netflix. What are you doing on the boat as everyone's dying and you're freezing to death and there's no food? So all January, February, and it wasn't until March 31st when they were able to get off the boat. And out of 123, there were only 53 people left. And then they get on the land and there's nothing there. It's not like they can swing by the hotel and take a shower and sleep. Like now you have to make houses and food. And like it blows our mind. And what I lament, because that's what we do in the podcast, lament. It's important. Lament is a very important thing to do. I lament that no one knows the story. I lament that I've gone how many years in my life without knowing and really contemplating the suffering that these people endured so that we can be here today and have Turkey Day. Gobble, gobble. And I think we should all know the story of William Bradford, the governor. We should read his diary. Like, we need to know what our pilgrims did, as opposed to just making it into a thing that kindergartners do. They dress up in funny costumes and sing a dumb song. So I lament that we're just not as serious people when it comes to our history.
Or the grotesquely oversimplified and inaccurate idea that Europeans swept across the country and slaughtered the brave, peaceful, lovely native peoples, because it was much, much more complicated than that. Which brings us to this book I mentioned by a Finnish scholar by the name of Hämäläinen, and that's close at best to how you pronounce his name. It has more umlauts than I've seen in 6 weeks in Germany. But anyway, he's talking about how the story of Native Americans in the United States is an incredibly complex, violent story in which they utterly dominated and decimated the Europeans every bit as much and more as the Europeans did mean stuff to the native people. And there were also alliances made and broken. There were treaties made and broken. And indeed, the early settlers, the early what's the proper term? The colonies, if you will.